Good day, viewers. Welcome to Cascade Transformatics Ltd, transforming you. On Module 12 today, what we'll be deliberating on is developing your critical thinking leadership skills. Developing your critical thinking leadership skills. By taking responsibility for your own leadership critical thinking processes, you are taking action to analyze and adapt your approach to decision making and problem solving. You put yourself and your company in a much stronger position to lead and succeed in the new normal business world. So I'm going to start with this question. What is critical thinking? What is critical thinking? This is the ability to think clearly and rationally, understanding the logical connection between ideas. Critical thinking has been the subject of much debate and has continued to be a subject of discussion into the modern age. For example, the ability to recognize fake news. Critical thinking must be described as the ability to engage in reflective and independent thinking. In essence, critical thinking requires you to use your ability to reason. It is about being an active learner rather than a passive recipient of information. Critical thinkers rigorously question ideas and assumptions rather than accepting them at face value. They will always seek to determine whether the idea, argument, and findings represent the entire picture and are open to finding that they do not. Critical thinkers will identify, analyze, and solve problems systematically than by intuition or instinct. The mindset that made leaders successful in the past probably won't ensure success in the future. In fact, certain studies and surveys have identified critical thinking as the #1 requirement for successful leadership in the 21st century. Yet, there is mounting evidence that many current and emerging leaders lack this quality. And it is this competency gap that is shaking up and reshaping leadership as we have come to know it. Now, the next question is, why critical thinking is critical? Critical thinking appears to be exactly what is needed from leaders who are navigating the volatility of the new normal. Diana Halpern, an award-winning professor of psychology at Claremont McKenna College and a widely read author on the subject, offers this definition in a seminal book, Thought and Knowledge, and I quote, "Critical thinking is the use of those cognitive skills or strategies that increase the probability of a desirable outcome. It is used to describe thinking that is purposeful, reasoned, and goal-directed. The kind of thinking involved in solving problems, formulating inferences, calculating likelihoods, and making decisions. It is the kind of thinking that makes desirable outcomes more likely. If ever there was a time for clear, designing, solution-centric thinking, this is it. Now, what does critical thinking looks like? That's the next question. What critical thinking looks like? Having established the need for him a mindset shift to more critical thinking, we need to be clear on what that means in the workplace. In general, critical thinking is the ability to deal with the contradictions and problems involved in environment in a reasoned, purposeful, productive way. Decisions are made using an approach that is fair, objective, accurate, and based on information that is relevant to the situation. Critical thinking is also reflective and focused, constantly evaluating the thinking process itself. It is thinking with a purpose. Critical thinking requires a healthy dose of skepticism and an equal measure of good judgment. Now we have 5 sub-test measures that was conducted, and it gave us a conclusion that critical thinking is a composite of attitude, knowledge, and skills. 5 subtext measure critical thinking as a composite of attitudes, knowledge, and skills. And this include inference, recognition of assumptions, deduction, interpretation, and evaluation of arguments. Professionals with high scores in this subtest are able to identify and examine the assumptions, influences, and bias that may swamp them. They stay back from the frail and strategically assess the strengths and weaknesses of alternative solutions, conclusions, or approaches to problems. They make business decisions that answer the right questions, solve the right problems, mitigate right, and improve productivity. They also lead from a position of strength, being able to motivate and move people both inspirationally and intellectually by providing solid reasons for actions. Whether they lead teams, departments, or entire enterprises, leaders who apply the skills of critical thinking to their roles perform at a higher level and offer their organizations a distinct competitive advantage. Critical thinkers think differently about their impact on the organization, understanding how their decisions and actions influence business, both inside and outside their narrow functional silos. These leaders are able to balance department or team issues with broader companies issues and embrace a larger responsibility for the success of the organization. This keen sense of accountability is what enables them to execute for results now while fulfilling their obligations to positively impact the future. Leaders who engage in critical thinking also understand the total organization and how the individual parts work together. Context is key. Now, more than ever, business acumen is functional to effective leadership. It is impossible to apply critical thinking skills to the business of making money without an understanding of the business drivers that connect day-to-day decisions and action to key financial and strategic performance goals of the organization. It is one thing to understand one's role as a leader. It is altogether another thing to understand how to set direction and directly affect the outcome. Critical thinking is big picture thinking too. Thinkers like that operate from a broad perspective in order to make sure the correct problems are addressed and they are taking an acceptable risk. They recognize the difference between short-term gains and sustainable long-term results and lead accordingly. So now, let's talk about the advantages of possessing the skill. The advantages of this kind of leadership behavior are readily apparent. Critical thinking enables leaders at every level to understand the impact of their decisions on the business as a whole and ensures both alignment with organizational goals and accountability for results. It's exactly the type of leadership behavior demanded by the new normal, and exactly what is missing. And this disconnect is likely to intensify over time. Given the critical thinking competency gap exposed by the researchers, the obvious assumption is that the traditional development process that businesses have relied upon in the past to prepare leaders simply hasn't kept up. So, what is the solution? The solution is to accelerate development and raise leadership accountability to a whole new level of awareness and actions. There needs to be a new emphasis on critical thinking in leadership development. Now, learning to think like a leader. How do we think like a leader? The good news is critical thinking is a skill that can be taught. According to Halpern, there's a large body of evidence showing that people can learn to think better. Of course, education makes us all more intelligent, but critical thinking is more focused. Everyone can learn to recognize and use the skills of critical thinking, and we can always get better. New competencies, however, may require a deeper, more analytical approach. The challenge today is not to discard what has been learned in the past, but to build upon traditional competencies with a new and more complex set of skills, tools, and sensitivities. Leaders in the new normal need to learn how to be discerning, how to think clearly and wisely, and how to be accountable for their impacts on the business. Another thing to do is discovering learning in leadership courses. Critical thinking can be impacted by the right leadership courses. However, the process can be more challenging than improving a behavioral skill because you can't easily measure it. Success is demonstrated in results. As with any skill, intellectual or otherwise, the key to building critical thinking and achieving successful results is practice. Research has demonstrated that people learn best when they are actively involved in the learning process and engaging in the behaviors they want to learn. But what's vital in developing critical thinking skill is framing the concept of practice within a relevant job-related context. Acquiring leadership critical thinking skills require participating in learning experiences that force you to consider new ways of thinking about and acting within complex situations that are directly related to the work you do. You need the opportunity to respond to issues, reflect on and reframe your experiences, developing new thinking, and in turn, engage in new behaviors and actions that are relevant to your position and objectives. The next thing we need to talk about now is developing your critical thinking skills. In addition to participating in these types of leadership courses, leaders can take charge of their own critical thinking development by taking the steps. One, get some feedback about your critical thinking skills from a trusted boss, colleague, or coach. Are you jumping to conclusions or using a reasoned analytic process as you work towards a goal? Are you able to put aside biases and assumptions during analyzing and decision making? What kind of thinker are you perceived to be and why? These are questions you can ask your trusted boss or colleague. Two, challenge yourself to develop a deeper understanding of your company's business, especially its financial and strategic drivers of success. Are you clear about what drives the organization's decision? How financial success is achieved and how you impact both strategy and the bottom line? Are you making decisions that are aligned with this understanding? Is your knowledge of the business strong enough to drive behavior and to engage teams and employees? That's the question for you. The next point is use multiple sources of data to form an information web before making a decision or forming a conclusion. And the questions that can help in this part is this. Are you asking a lot of questions? Identifying stakeholders and their issues and opinion? Separating facts from assumptions? Are you using the internet as one source of information rather than the source? Can you analyze information from different perspectives and viewpoints? The next is take time to think. Take time to think. Are you raising above the fray when it is important to make a decision, take action, or form an opinion? Are you aware of the distractions getting in the way of your thinking time and taking action to minimize these distractions? Are you finding time and space to let your mind focus and reflect on important issues? Take time to think. The next point and the last on this phase, ask for inputs and opinions from others as you analyze alternatives. Are you checking tentatively conclusions with others? Using peers, coaches, or mentors to analyze your thinking processes? Are you willing to open your mind to other ideas or alternatives? This question will help you on how to analyze alternatives. The next on the slide is the skills we need for critical thinking. The skills we need for critical thinking. The skills that we need in order to be able to think critically are varied. And these include observation, analysis, interpretation, reflection, evaluation, inference, explanation, problem solving, and decision making. Specifically, we need to be able to think about a topic or issue in an objective and critical way. We also need to identify the different arguments there are in relation to a particular issue, to evaluate a point of view to determine how strong or valid it is. We also need to recognize any weaknesses or negative points that they are in the evidence or arguments. We also need to notice what implications they might be behind a statement or argument. And lastly on this, provide structured reasoning and support for an argument that we wish to make. So now, the next point is to go practical now, the critical thinking process. You should be aware that none of us think critically all the time. I want to establish that. Sometimes we think in almost any way, but critically. For example, when our self-control is affected by anger, grief, or joy, or when we are feeling just plain. On the other hand, the good news is that since our critical thinking ability varies according to our current mindset, most of the time we can learn to improve our critical thinking ability by developing certain routine activities and applying them to all problems that present themselves. Once you understand the theory of critical thinking, improve your critical thinking skills takes persistency and practice. So try this simple exercise to help you to think critically. Think of something that someone has recently told you. Then ask yourself the following questions. 1. Who said it? Someone you know? Someone in a position of authority or power? Does it matter who told you this? That's one question. 2, what did they say? Did they give facts or opinions? Did they provide all the facts? Did they leave anything out? The next question, where did they say it? Was it in a public or in private? Did other people have a chance to respond and provide an alternative account? When did they say it? Was it before, during, or after an important event? Is timing important? These are questions you need to ask yourself when you are faced with a situation. Why did they say it? Did they explain the reasoning behind their opinions? Were they trying to make someone look good or bad? The next question, how did they say it? Were they happy or sad, angry or indifferent? Did they write it or say it? Could you understand what was said? And the last question, what are you aiming to achieve? One of the most important aspects of critical thinking is to decide what you are aiming to achieve and then make a decision based on a range of possibilities. Once you have clarified that aim for yourself, you should use it as the starting point in all future situations requiring thoughts and possibly further decision making. Where needed, make your workmates, family, or those around you aware of your intention to pursue this goal. You must then discipline yourself to keep on track until changing circumstances meanings. You have to revisit the start of the decision-making process. However, there are things that get in the way of simple decision-making. We all carry with us a range of likes and dislikes, learned behaviors and personal preferences developed throughout our lives. They are the hallmark of being human. A major contribution to ensure we think critically is to be aware of this personal, considering possible next steps. Whether they are at the pre-action consideration stage or as part of a routine caused by unexpected or unforeseen impediments to continued progress. The more clearly we are aware of ourselves, our strengths and weaknesses, the more likely our critical thinking will be productive. So now let's go to the benefits of foresight. The benefits of foresight. Perhaps the most important element of critical thinking is foresight. Almost all decisions we make and implement don't prove disastrous if we find reasons to abandon them. However, our decision making will be infinitely better and more likely to lead to success if, when we reach a tentative conclusion, we pause and consider the impact on the people and activities around us. The elements needing consideration are generally numerous and varied. In many cases, consideration of one element from a different perspective will reveal potential dangers in pursuing our decision. For instance, moving a business activity to a new location may improve potential outputs considerably, but it may also lead to the loss of skilled workers if the distance moved is too great. Which of these is the more important consideration? Is there some way of lessening the conflicts? These are the sort of problems that may arise from incomplete critical thinking, a demonstration perhaps of the critical importance of good critical thinking. Now, to summarize all that has been said, I'm going to start by saying this. Critical thinking is aimed at achieving the best possible outcomes in any situation. Evaluating information from as many different sources possible. 2, critical thinking requires a clear, often uncomfortable assessment of your personal strengths, weaknesses, and preferences, and their possible impact on decisions you may take. 3, critical thinking requires the development and use of foresight as far as this is possible for us to see. The next point, implementing the decisions made arising from critical thinking may take into account an assessment of possible outcome and ways of avoiding potentially negative outcome, or at least lessen their impact. The next point, critical thinking involves reviewing the results of the application of decision made and implementing change where possible. It might be thought that we are overextending our demands on critical thinking in expecting that it can help to construct focused meaning rather than examining the information given and the knowledge we have acquired to see if we can, if necessary, construct a meaning that will be acceptable and useful. After all, almost no information we have available to us, either externally or internally, carries any guarantee of its life or appropriateness. Neat step-by-step instructions may provide some sort of trellis on which our basic understanding of critical thinking can blossom, but it does not and cannot provide any assurance of certainty, utility, or longevity. Thank you so much for listening. Now, if you have questions or contributions based on this topic, developing your critical thinking leadership skills, you can drop it on the chat box. So I encourage contributions on this platform. Please, if you have any contribution, please just drop it on the chat box. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Mrs. Adeola Adewale, for that comment. Thank you. In the absence of any question or contribution, this is where we are going to wrap it up on leadership. Tomorrow, by the grace of God, same time, we'll be talking about authority, power, and leadership. Do have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye for now.